I promised in the class essentials that I wouldn't make a lot of videos since this is a writing and reading class, but I'll make one that's appropriate here because we're taking a look at some student papers that are models for the first paper assignment, the observation description assignment. Here's our assignment here. You recognize it right away. It's one that we're been working on in our second to last week for this assignment. This video contains some examples of student papers that have worked well and some that have worked less well. I've gotten permission to use these papers. And the only thing I'd say about taking a look at the video and sort of taking example from some of these students' papers is that you're not to actually copy them word for word, and that they are meant as educational purposes only. You never want to take a student paper and use it word for word for something that you want to turn in, not the least of which is because it's plagiarism, but also because it's not really doing the job of writing. But let's see if we can't discover some things from past student papers that will give you some insight as to what you might do to be successful for this paper. So, okay, some examples that we can take a look at today. Look at a couple to begin with. Here's a student paper that seems pretty ordinary on its surface. Yeah. But it's doing the job of the assignment, which is getting the spirit of the assignment right away. I'll have some students take a look at a paper like this and kind of laugh, but they really shouldn't, because it's doing something that's no less important than what Samuel Scudder's doing. Look at the topic here. Looking past the everyday, it's got a title here. Sometimes people forget altogether to put a title on, or they put a title, say, Observations, which I find pretty boring. Very vanilla title. When you think of it, the title is the first impression that you want to make for your paper, but I wouldn't labor over it as if it's the only thing that you're writing. And here's his beginning. He says, describing new places can be challenging and fun, but I wanted to go into this assignment with the approach of what have I been missing? Looking for the things that stick out from the ordinary, the things that are beyond the obvious that everybody sees. He says, I picked a very basic item to observe. It has been in front of me for over half my life, and I probably walked by it 1,000 times on the way to school and work. I have a great big tree in the front yard that resides about 15 feet outside my front double doors. I wanted to observe this because of the fact that it has been in front of my own two eyes for so long, and I wanted to know what I had been oblivious to this entire time. All right, the paper's about a tree. Now, I've skipped over a couple of errors that are in this first paragraph because there are a couple small errors that I would normally mark up and did for the student. But in this case, I want to focus on the subject. I'm going to take a look at a tree that he hasn't looked at before, and the things that he'll notice about the tree, not just the tree swing in it, and the fact that he used it as a child to climb on, but the fact that it's also this tree that he can study and examine the bark of, examine its injuries, examine how well it's growing. You don't have to be an arborist to notice things about a tree right in front of your house, or be interested in a tree, or to recite old poems about how trees are important and there's nothing like them. A tree is a good subject here because just as Samuel Scudder took a look at a fish and it was no big deal, here's a fish. And yet he was really observing his observations. So the discoveries that are going to be made in this paper are, yes, about the tree, but also about what you miss, what you don't notice. Right? It might be interesting if you were to look at the place, you kind of glide right by. That's the approach to the assignment, and it's no small thing, so please don't treat it as just something that's very ordinary indeed. Let me do one thing. Okay, now here's a paper that's a little assignment-y at the beginning, but it has some decent idea what to do, and let me show why. If you're going right from the beginning of the paper, he says, right after I was assigned this paper, I knew exactly where I wanted to go and observe and describe. I chose one of my favorite spots to go in Minnesota, a place where it's always calm and a great place to sit and think. It's also one of the spots that I take all my friends who come to the Twin Cities, so you can tell it means a lot to me. It's not a bad beginning, although I think the context that you need to give for the place where you're going to go can be shorter generally. You don't want to run the risk of sounding a little bit too assignment-y. Now I'll show you an example of a paper that's really assignment-y later. It says, this paper is about, and that's something you should weed out of the paper when you're ready to turn in the final draft. The place you go is not just to fulfill an assignment. Everybody can do that. I'm fulfilling an assignment, they'd say. You want to show that the place where you're going has a purpose, and don't want that to interfere with the thesis that you're trying to present. Let's continue on with this paper. The place I chose is a small little stretch of the shore along the Mississippi River, and it's located right at the end of Summit Avenue and the east bank of the river. Now, there's no main idea yet presented, so that's a little fault of this paper. I think giving us context, but no sense of purpose or what we're going to see when we get out there. And the hook could be a little bit stronger in this paper. It's not a perfect paper, but there are good things that will go on in it. Now let's take a look at what he says here. He has almost a second introduction with that second paragraph. Perhaps he could combine the two and actually make a stronger paper. After classes on Monday, I drove over there, excited to see what would stick out to me. So after arriving, I decided to move down close to the bank where I saw there was no one around. After finally getting set up, I tried to observe my surroundings, but suddenly gnats started coming from everywhere. It started to pester me as if they were starving and I was a steak dinner. Luckily, I swatted and fought them off, so I was now ready to start taking in my surroundings. Continuing on just a little bit. You got the gnats, the steak dinner. Now, the first thing that stuck out to me was that this was a usually quiet place, but from far away across the river, I started to hear the sound of the jackhammer and the long drawn-out sound of a construction vehicle backing up. Beep, beep, beep. And you might think this is kind of irrelevant or unimportant, but it's not bad, trying to get us there and to put the sound effects there. And I'll say that, and I'll have 20 people immediately trying to incorporate some kind of sound effects in the paper. It's only really appropriate if what you're doing really relates to the main point, and it will relate to this student's main point because he's going to write about the things that are going to interfere with the things that interfere with his observing his natural surroundings, which is what he went there to do in the first place. So that's why I kind of show this paper. While it gets off to a little bit of a rough start, the basic idea that this student has followed is not a bad one because he is trying to put us there and talk about the difficulties of putting himself there, because difficulty talking about where he's observing because of all of the things that are distracting and interfering with his observation assignment. And that'll be part of the focus of the paper, part of what he talks about in order to overcome the distractions. Just as Samuel Scudder had to refocus and get back to the thing he was studying, so too did this student. Let's continue on. Let's take a look at another paper here. I have a paper here that's a description paper, and it's about observing dogs when they get together. Again, you may laugh at this, but when you're observing the natural world or even the animal world, lots of different things can happen. I like this paper because this student, who really did love her animals, talked about and talked in detail about how the animals got together and how they interacted and what she looked for. I've had really decent papers about such subjects because you have to really attend and look closely. And those people who are animal lovers know that they do have to watch very carefully as to how they're reacting, what they need. Let's take a little look at her paper. Who loves dogs? I do. I own a pit bull and her name is Honey. Honey does everything with me. You could say that she's connected to my hip. This weekend, Honey and I went up north to visit my brother for Labor Day weekend. My brother owns a pit bull too. Her name is Charlie. Honey is 2 years old and Charlie is 6 months old. Whenever Honey and I go to visit my brother, Honey shows the need for control and power towards Charlie because Honey is older and wiser. Now here we do have a main thesis. Pretty good. The introduction itself talks about a couple of different things. There could be ways to make that more coherent, but she's headed somewhere. She's talking about how the dogs interact when they do get together. And that's not a bad thing. She's going to have to observe and actually describe the specifics of that. She's going to have to talk about even how they react to each other, not just by biting, but also by how they play and don't play very well when they're meeting each other. And I think that is right at the heart of the assignment. You're noticing these small details, things that people might otherwise just totally neglect. All right, let's take a look at another couple of papers. This student offers a different kind of example. His introduction's not perfect or anything, and I'll just kind of talk about it more generally. He's a student who worked down at the train yard, and he would describe how, during one instance, he felt the train itself shifting underneath him, and could describe that in pretty vivid detail, as part of option 2 for the assignment. The reason why it was pretty successful is that it did describe the shifting of the train car underneath him and his reaction to it. You can tell his senses were very much heightened. And to his credit, he tried to remember and record what it felt like. Take a look at one more paper here too. Talked about dogs, talked about trees, talked about trains. And here's a student doing something very different indeed. This student writes about not only a thing that's right in front of him, but also something that did serve to protect him and his safety. He says at the beginning, there is a lot to say about the seemingly simple creation, the 16.5-pound amalgamation of DuPont, Kevlar, Cordura, nylon, and boron ceramic carbide. Talk about a case where if you have the vocabulary for something, you really do notice what something is made of. So here's a case where serving to prove not just that you can recognize cars, as we took a look at last week, or little subtle details in a photograph, but other things too. Looking at a flak jacket. And let's continue on. I look beyond the obvious nuances. In front of me, the woodland camouflage patterned outer shell, a black, brown, green, and tan, the shell decorated like an odd-shaped Christmas tree, with numerous pouches of various sizes affixed to horizontal loops of nylon. It's true that when you do describe something, you're pretty naturally drawn to compare it to things that people have seen before. He is trying to explain what something looks like by comparing it to something that we've had before. And this is a simile, of course, in language. That's why we're doing this at all in language, trying to get that comparison just apt. Everybody would recognize what that might look like. During the examination, my mind begins to wander to good times and bad, wearing this very vest. It kept me warm on the cold desert nights while standing watch over unimportant intersections in an equally unimportant corner of Baghdad. Like an oven on clean, it baked me during the sweltering heat of summer days in the Middle East. Here's another simile here, like an oven on clean. It also formed a pillow when I had a moment to nap, while the chauffeured discussed the operations of the week, and a rather lumpy blanket when steel rain pelted the area surrounding my tent. Now, there's no specific thesis by the end of this first paragraph, but you can tell he's going to be describing this jacket in detail, including the various small details, the sweat stains that are on the jacket, the holes in the jacket from where flak did hit it, and he himself came close to being injured. And that's why it's kind of original assignment, because in some ways it's combining options 1 and 2, doing a good job of describing both. And notice how specific what he's describing is. If you try and take on too much, you won't be able to do a good job on the piece that you're actually focusing on. I'd like to shift now. Let's take a look at some that are less successful. Here's one that's less successful. The student begins with a very assignment-y beginning. As you'll see, there's also no statement of where we're going. And it presents not a bad paper per se, but a problem that sometimes people face with this paper assignment. There is a park down the street from me. It's called Ernster Park. I chose this park because it was close and convenient, and there normally are a lot of children. You've noticed already that I'm skipping over the small aspects that need to be corrected because I want to take a look at how the paper works on a larger scale. I won't be skipping over when I read it, and I didn't when I read this paper. But let's take a look. Here's this park I'm going to. Ernster Park has a black path that runs through the park. It first passes a basketball court on the right, and then a volleyball court on the left. As you continue to move forward, you will reach every child's fun zone, the park. Once passing the park, the path continues. It goes in a circle around the soccer field, although a forest of trees and leading back up to through a forest of trees and leading back up to the park. It was a gorgeous day, but for some reason I thought it would be very uneventful. I thought it would be uneventful there. Okay. Some surprise coming up. But he really doesn't have more than a hint that something does happen. There's only the hint of a thesis here. Not all the details relate yet, and they don't relate to each other or to a point. Seems like we're getting more of a list at the beginning, and that's one thing you want to be on guard for, just listing stuff. Basketball court, and then it goes through here, and here comes the path. That's not so much describing, really, it's just listing stuff, and could be presented in a bullet point list, but that's not what I've asked you to do in your assignment. So be sure that when you're rendering details, you're not just skipping from one thing to the next. Here's a worst case example of such a paper. This student writes about a party that he went to, which isn't necessarily a bad topic, except he's clearly not observing it very specifically. He says, I decided to go to Shakopee and party at some Asian guy's house. I did not know the guy, and I had just decided to drive half an hour from my house with some friends from school. When I arrived at the house, something felt odd to me. Now, unlike the train paper, just talking about how it felt odd, he says that something formed in the pit of his stomach, which is kind of a cliched expression, but what is it? Despite that feeling, I began to walk up the driveway, start conversing with my friend Jephthah, a muscular black guy from Nigeria. There was a bonfire in the driveway, and there were a lot of people around it, smoking cigarettes and drinking beer, just having a good time. Again, skipping over some of the fragments and other errors in the paper so far, though they do detract from the writing overall. A couple of minutes passed by. The rest of my friends from school show up, and we decide to go inside. Now we shift tenses here. Let's continue on here. We walk under the half-open garage, and it is packed. There is people, booze, tables everywhere. The music is blaring. Everyone is dancing. This paper is not so much describing something as it's listing stuff. This was there, that was there, here are all the things that were on offer. He does get in later on to talking about a fight that happens during this party, but for the most part the descriptions are incredibly vague and I don't know, bordering on kind of questionable. The grouping of people together. You want to be much more specific than this. Remember how specific we were in looking at the facts. Remember how specific Samuel Scudder had to be in noticing things about his subject. This one fails for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that it's not doing the job of actual description. It's more like listing stuff. Okay, take a look at some other good papers here. Here's a student who writes the description of shooting a gun at a game. and trying to capture what it's like to have that gun go off and knowing that you've sighted up your target exactly, what that feels like. Here's another student going to a park. We'll take a look at her introduction. She says, when selecting a location to observe, I wanted a place where there would not be a lot of people and commotion to keep my area of observation narrow. Also, I wanted a place that was familiar to me in the hope that I might learn something new. I decided on Holland Lake, located within Lebanon Hills Regional Park in Egan. I often go there for a good workout on the many hiking trails. While observing Lebanon Hills, I noticed that I was becoming more and more anxious. I was constantly thinking about all the assignments I had to do and what my provocative or interesting point might be for this paper. Here's a student who kind of psychs herself out because she focuses on mostly her inability to actually sit and observe and not think about the next thing. Actually helps her write a decent paper as a result, because she talks about how she overcomes that and is able to observe things in spite of the fact that she does have anxiety about getting other things done. Let's take a look at one more good paper. Here's one more good paper. Unpredicted Serenity, she says in her title. On my first day in taking the city bus to school, I was walking down the busy downtown St. Paul streets, searching for the right bus stop to wait at. The stop was only a few blocks away. I was anticipating the next half hour of my wait to be anything but great. Let's face it, the last place anyone might think to find a relaxing and peaceful place to sit would be a busy, crowded, traffic-filled city bus stop. However, I now disagree. Now, just overlook the fact that this is a run-on sentence, but I'd like to just point out that what she's done here is rather clever, because she's taken the common thing that people might think about, bus stop. They're going to all look the same, and who cares what they look like? That's not going to be a very pleasant place to be, because most people are waiting for the next thing. But she actually starts to notice through the process of the paper that someone's actually put some thought into the bus stop, making it actually a more pleasant place to be, a place that if you're not used to waiting for buses, it's not going to be a bad place to actually spend some time at. And it's going to have a fountain, it's going to have a garden, it's going to easily tell you when your next bus is going to be by. It's not a bad way to go into a paper. And what she's done in this last sentence, let me highlight it again. She's done something I encourage in a typical campus class, which is to talk about what everybody thinks about a place, and then talk about what surprises you find. The myth about a place, the stereotype about a place, what commonly everybody thinks about, and then talk about, well, here's what I think, here's the surprise that I found, here's the unique direction I took, that road less traveled, if you like poetry. So there are some examples of paper assignments and what students have done with this paper. Let's go back to our assignment again. This is your assignment sheet. You're used to seeing this, right? And if you've skipped it already, it might be worth reviewing just for a minute. I'd like you to describe that place, as it says here, thoroughly, originally, and deliberately. That means it's your own description. You're really going into detail. If you pick something too big, trying to talk about a subject too vaguely or too generally, it won't be very successful at all. It has to be from your perspective, the things that you noticed there. You're emulating what Samuel Scudder and countless students have done after Samuel Scudder. So really dig in and look at that place. The provocative point that you write about during your stay at that place will probably be something you discover while you're there or while you're writing about it. You may have a rough idea of what you're doing as you go into writing the paper. You might have a general direction of where you're going to go. But this paper might be unnerving because it encourages you to think during the process of actually writing, to think, as they say, in ink, or in this case in pixels, to think as you're putting your thoughts into words on the screen itself. Lots of precedent for this, of course. There's a very famous saying by E.M. Forster, a novelist from the previous century, who said, "How can I know what I think until I see what I write? How can I know what I think until I see what I write?" It's not that he was stupid. It is that the process of writing about an experience has its own way of actually working out a main point. And it's not exaggerated, actually. It's not only borne out by experience, but by science. That writing does aid thinking, it does aid memory, just like reading does too. You want to take that seriously so that if a thought occurs to you, and you say, well, maybe this idea is actually a little bit better to write about, you don't want to hesitate. I did have one student who happened upon a better thesis for her paper, but then she said, well, should I do this even though it makes me rewrite the paper? And I said, isn't it a better thesis? Won't it result in something better? All that work that you did before for the paper isn't wasted effort. It's preliminary work to actually get to that more interesting thesis. And of course, that's what I'll be looking for, the ability to express that idea, an interesting, unified main point. If you have a bunch of stuff from your log or from your observations that don't relate to that main point, you want to look through and see if you can't edit it out. Because, of course, in the development of the paper, you have to have specifics that really do explain yourself in some detailed fashion and not just a list. Not just a list that you could have bullet pointed or something else. Now, not every story is going to be as dramatic as that, but you do want to be focused in this paper on developing an idea that unifies all of your observations. Ones that don't fit in, you'll have to be careful that you edit or try to unify them so that they do fit in. I'll be looking for that idea. It says here, do you have an interesting unified main point? Do you eliminate distractions? We'll be looking for the development of the idea, that it's not developed just in lists, as we saw, but that it's developed through real description of what's going on, and that it's clearly expressed. Those are some ideas for paper topics and some samples of past papers that I've gotten. If you have questions about these or anything about your assignment, be sure to email me this week. I'll still be checking email up until the due date, and I want to try and help. But don't wait until the last minute if you can help it. Thanks very much. Good luck.